Hello, I am Meet and in this video we'll learn about embedded replicas in Turso with LibSQL database in Golang application. Embedded replica is a native feature of LibSQL database. It is kind of best of both worlds. By both worlds, I mean one hand it is a local file-based database and a remote database. With embedded replicas, we can have faster writes and global read access from the remote database. So on the one side we have Golang application and on the other side we have LibSQL remote database which is hosted on Turso. The Golang application first sends a request to create an embedded replica of the remote database. This requires a few parameters like the local database path, the URL of the remote database, and authentication token. This will dive deeper into the code. Then, after the replica is created locally, we can write rows or any data to it from a application. This could be one time or multiple writers from different servers. Then, once the writes are complete, we can sync the local database with the remote database, or we could use intervals to periodically sync the local database with the remote one. So let's get started from the code itself. So first we'll try to connect a local database, local LibSQL database with using a Golang application. So first we'll create a Golang project. So let's start with the model initialization, which will give a name, the Git provider, the username, and the repository name, which is a convention to create a Golang package. So once we have created the Golang project, we can start with the application itself. First, we'll create the name as main, the function main function, and then we can give the local database name as local.db, which will be a libsql file. Then we can import golibsql, which will be used to connect and operate the libsql database locally. We'll open the connection and log out any errors if there are any, and then we can close the connection afterwards. We'll then create a query which will be used to generate 10 random numbers between 0 to 4. So that is absolute value and randomly selected from 5 samples. So if there are errors, we'll log those out as usual, and the rows object will be closed afterwards. But first we'll iterate over the rows and store each row value in I, which will return from the single row. So we'll scan the row and get that result of that single row in the variable I. And if there's an error in reading the row, we'll log it out and log the row as well. So this will be the function to read a local libsql file, which is a SQLite like file database from locally. So we'll first download the Go libsql package, which is used to connect to a local libsql database as well. So this will install the package and we can run the program, which will now print 10 numbers between 0 to 1 just to show how to read a libsql database locally. We will explore how to create tables and sort of insert rows into the tables in the later section of this video. So we can see the local DB has no schema currently. We will try to insert tables and insert the rows into the tables as well. Moving on, we will try to see how embedded replicas actually work, where we will create an embedded replica on the local system by pulling off from the remote database and then write into the local replica and sync up with the remote database and then read from the local one. So first thing we'll need to create is the actual program, where we'll create the main function and the main package as usual. So we'll create a local DB which will be stored in the temporary directory called libsql. This is just a convention by the libsql community. So we'll create the temporary folder libsql where we'll store the local DB file and then remove the folder at the end of the execution of this program. And then we'll create a DB path, which will be the combination of the temporary directory and the database file name. After that is done, we get the database URL, Turso database URL from the remote database, which will be set from the environment variable and also get the URL token. So this will only be used for creating a replica and syncing it to the remote database. After this is done, we'll try to have try to use the new embedded replica connector, which will be used to create a replica locally in the DB path that we have created, that is the local database. And then we'll require the DB URL, which will be the remote database from which we are connecting to. And then for authentication, we will require the DB auth token to access the remote database on Turso. So we'll try to clean up if there are errors, log it out and close the connection. So here the connector is a actual DB connector and not a DB file. So we will use SQL.OpenDB, which takes in the connector, and not unlike open function in SQL, which we'll use to create from the database string. So we'll table query, create table query, which will be used to create a table. So this will be creating a post table, for example, like which will have columns like ID, title, description, and content. After this is created, we can use the execute command, which will take the query and execute the given query. Once that, we can create the post using the create post query, which will insert into post the title, description, and content. So the execute command will take the actual query and positional parameters, which are provided in the question mark, which will first will be the title, the description, and the content. So once that is executed, we can execute this query as well. So once the query is executed, we can then sync the made changes. That is, we have created a table and inserted a row. We can then sync the local database to the remote one. So we'll say connector.sync will sync up the local database from the remote one. We can also pass in the interval where periodically it will sync up with the remote database. After sync is completed, we can read the return changes from the local database. So we'll use db.query to query all the posts. So select star from post, and then we will create a row. So then we will try to clean up those rows and then close the rows. And for each row, we will have a ID, title, description, and content. So we'll try to read those values from each row and then print those out, and we can do all sorts of stuff from this point. So this is what the program looks like. So we have seen we have created the database, local database, and then sync up with the remote one. So after we execute this program, we should have local DB created, tables inserted, and rows inserted, and sync synced with the remote database, and that should be the remote database should have those values which we have populated. So if we check the Turso database explorer, we can see that there is a single row in the post table created. So then in the actual scenario, we will have multiple writers writing simultaneously to this database. So we can see it has created a second row, which the content, the row data is the same, but the ID is given differently because it's a primary key. So after we have seen one row being inserted into the database, we will try to change the values and try to insert those rows as well and check it out from the Turso database explorer. We can see that that is being populated from the remote database itself. So this is how embedded replica works in Turso. So for the final part, we'll be looking into how we can query the remote database and get this data back from what we have written. From my previous video where I tried to demonstrate how we can read from the remote database. So right now we'll create a simple program which will have a post structure which will have ID, title, description and content. Those are from the structure we previously created in the example. Then we'll have the DB URL which will be the remote database libsql URL, and the DB auth token which will be used to open the connection and get the database object. So we'll use SQL.open. In this case, it is a string. So DB URL will be the string to open the connection, and then we'll log out the errors if there are any, and then close the DB connection at the very end. And then we'll use db.query to select all the posts from the posts table which we created in the previous example. So this will have the row object created for us. Then we'll iterate over all the rows, and the individual row will be a post object. So we'll try to scan the row object and get ID, title, description and content sequentially in that row object. And then print the logs out and print the row object as well. We need to install LibSQL client Go, which is used to connect a remote LibSQL database on the edge. So after we execute this program, we should see all the data which we have populated from the previous examples be ready in the previous examples in this uh, stuff. So we can see there are three rows being populated, which are like ID, title, and post. So this is how we can use embedded replicas to create a copy of remote database locally and then write to that local database and then sync up with the remote database to read the fresh data from the primary remote database. Thank you for watching.